Interesting. The last show I gave led to numerous questions, including quite a few questions messaged to me afterwards, emailed and so on by people who watched the recordings. And I think I rushed near the end of the show through what's actually quite a complicated matter, both philosophically and theologically, and practically speaking. So I just want to give the headlines of what I was trying to say at the end of the last show, and then translate that into philosophical terms. And I apologize last year, but it was pointed out to me this is meant to be a philosophy show, so I won't apologize this time. But we'll have to go into quite deep philosophy for a few moments. I'm arguing that the Baal ShemTov, in one sense, is a mystic as part of a family of mystics, meaning to say that there's a old Jewish tradition of mysticism, other faiths have their own traditions of mysticism, and there's a commonality between all mystics, all monotheistic mystics, including in this respect Muslim and Christian mystics and so on, in which they have a sense that the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual are more permeable than we naturally think, are weaker than we naturally think, are somehow illusory, and they live with a sense of the presence of the divine as immanent in a much stronger sense than us non-mystics do, and with a desire, a hunger, a thirst, a longing for what we would call dveikut, or for a union, a mystical union with the divine, and a very intense personal relationship. And in that sense, Jewish mysticism is as old as Judaism. Nevuah is whatever exactly Nevuah is a very intense mystical experience of direct connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we find Moshe expressing that longing, Hareini noch v'odecha, I want to see you. Hashem answers, Panai lo yirah, you can't have complete clarity and revelation, but you can have some. A nikvat tasor, stand in the rock, and you'll somehow perceive of me. Achorai, you can see my behind me, but you can't see Pana, you can't see my face. So these are things already in Nach and Tanakh. We have descriptions of Nevi'im describing this overwhelming sense of the presence of Hashem, being thrown onto the ground, feeling overwhelmed, sometimes pained by the experience. So in that sense, this is a very classic. Baal Shem Tov is part of a very classic tradition of mysticism. We see mysticism gone wrong. We see in the Torah itself the story of the Zakanim who vayochu vayishtu. They somehow had a very imminent experience. This is the end of Parshas Mishpatim, right? They have this very imminent. They see livnas hasapir. They see this sapphire brick underneath the feet of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Very later Nevi'im describing seeing the image of God on its throne, and very imminent experiences and awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then we get to the Gemara, and we see the story of those that menichnas lepardis. Rabbi Akiva emerges unharmed, and others are harmed. So the idea of mysticism as this longing and this dangerous pursuit is not a new one. In the 1500s, we have the emergence of Lurianic Kabbalah, and the Baal Shem Tov is a successor to that, in the sense that he, like his opponents, by the way, like the Misnagdim, are learning the same classic sources. They're learning the Kabbalah and the mysticism of Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and the Arizal, the great Arizal, the holy Arizal. And in that sense, again, the Baal Shem Tov is part of that mystical movement. Again, we don't know much about his learning. We don't know exactly where he learned. Is he an autodidact? Is he part of mystical circles? The other earlier Bali Shem that are mentioned in Chassidic tradition, that's him being Talmidim of. But somehow or other, he emerges as a mystic, a learned mystic, a rabbinic scholar, and all this sort of mythology out there in the past that he wasn't, we now know is untrue. Okay. However, at some point, this takes a turn and a twist. And something unique emerges here. And what I was trying to explain last week is what's unique about the Baal Shem Tov's program, and why somehow or other there's circles of Kabbalists outside him. There are other Bali Shem around who are faith healers. There's circles of Kabbalists. His brother-in-law, Gershon of Kittov, his father-in-law, are members of the Kabbalists from the Brody Klois that I mentioned last week. This cloister, this Klois, this kollel, you can call it, of Kabbalists. There are other Kabbalists around. His opponents, the Misnagdim, are Kabbalists, some of them. But something unique emerges in the Baal Shem Tov. And we're trying to piece together what is it that's unique. And there are a number of features that I was trying to bring out last week, and this is really where I want to launch into this. The Baal Shem Tov sees God as immanent. He doesn't just see God as immanent in meditative experiences, in going away to silent chambers and meditating as perhaps mystics would have in the past. He has those experiences. We have an amazing record of his Aliyas Neshama, of his own mystic experience, where he experiences his soul ascending on high and encountering Mashiach and other amazing things. But he wants to build a system in which he says you are aware of the presence of God in everything you do. But it's a pasuk, "B'chol derachav te'ehu," in all your ways know him. But he sees it as an agenda. He builds a pragmatic system in which he is turning to the Jewish people, and he says this in his testimony about what Mashiach says to him. He says, every single one of you, every single person, sage or scoundrel, learned person or ignoramus, is capable of living in a world so infused with divine energy, radiating the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu so powerfully that in everything you do, you live with this conscious awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the presence, and you see the divine light in everything you experience. You're walking around in a state of mysticism as you're living your regular life, as you're running your contract with the local poets, the local landlord, and you're distributing beer in your pub, as was a common Jewish practice, as you're using the Arandite system, and you're tax farming forestry, as you're doing your regular simple life in Ukraine and Poland and the Carpathian Mountains. You're suffused with mysticism. You're living with an awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Mashiach says to the Baal ShemTov, I will only come when your Torah is spread everywhere, and when everyone is as capable as you of miyachid yichudim. We spoke about this last week, of unifying that which is plural, l'shem yichud, but living a life in which all the plurality of the world, the whole multiplicity of the world, is somehow unified, and people are capable of unifying it, and everyone is capable of an aliyas neshama like you, of these mystical experiences. So the Baal ShemTov takes Kabbalistic ideas and makes them a way of life. It's pragmatic. It's not just for an elite. It's for the mass, and it's not just for when you are locked away in isolation. It's when you're living and living a regular life. Now, again, everything in Judaism is old new. Nothing is new. Every revolution of thought or new idea is finding sources in Chazal and so on. We're all getting back to Matan Torah, but in laying an emphasis on different things and translating terms in different ways, you bring out something different, subtly different. And we're going to see that in the philosophy of the Baal Shem Tov in a few moments. The Ramah opens his Shulchan Aruch by saying, this isn't just a book of rules, that Shivisi Hashem lenegdi, it's a pasuk. I should be aware of the presence of Hashem opposite me constantly. So you could say the Ramah is saying the same thing, but the Baal Shem Tov is expressing this in a far more lived mystical way, as a awareness of constant presence of Hashem. The Baal Shem Tov lives in a world in which is glowing with the divine in a very powerful manner, and he believes that anyone, if we would just open our eyes, can see that and can be mystics in that sense. Now, that's the headlines of what I'm going to try and explore. Now, I want to take this in two directions. The second direction I'll go in will be pointing out that behind this very beautiful philosophy lies also very problematic and controversial and difficult philosophical ideas. And we'll have to understand that, to understand the danger that was perceived by the opponents of Chassidus and Chassidus, and what the Chassidish response would be to it. But there's a theological idea being expressed here that is not a simple one, even though it sounds very basic. If we said, well, is God everywhere? We all grew up singing Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is absolutely everywhere. We all believe that God is absolute reality and so on. So what's controversial in all of this? But there are ideas that are very problematic in this, that need to be unpicked and understood, which ultimately led to the controversy around Chassidus. This is number one, as a pure philosophy. Number two, however, is that there are sociological and psychological implications in this also, because what the Baal Shem Tov really is doing is taking mystical ideas and in a sense psychologizing them, saying they should become part of your psyche, part of your makeup as a human being. There's things within this which are meant to form your personality, form your psyche. Now, on a practical level, that takes energy and could be perceived as draining energy from what classically Jews thought was Avodas Hashem, which is learning Torah, davening, and keeping mitzvahs, halacha basically. So suddenly there's a whole other pragmatic element to worshipping Hashem and drawing close to him. That's one challenge in psychologizing it. The second challenge in psychologizing it is very fast psychology moves to sociology. we're going from abstract philosophy, which is the world of ideas, to the human psyche, and then how humans interact with each other, which is now already sociology. And out of this emerges what I rushed last week, this very thick Hasidic culture, this very, but I mean that in a dense way, a far greater commitment to each other, to their group, to the tzaddik, to the Rebbe, and their link to him. I said this, and I think some people thought I meant this critically. I didn't mean it critically. I meant it absolutely neutrally. Our loyalty to our wonderful shul, however wonderful it is thin. You could conceive yourself as moving to another shul. You might leave the area and move to Israel and cease to be a member of the shul. It's not as life-defining as belonging to a Hasidic group is, in which it would be almost inconceivable to shift your Hasidic group, and it would be a transnational kahila. You may move to the other end of the world. You can be in Australia, you can be in Canada, you can be in Israel or America, and you're in England, and you're still part of that kahila in a certain sense. The relationship to the tzaddik, and I'll use the classic Chassidish word, not the Rebbe, the Adma, the tzaddik. The relationship to the tzaddik is a very intense one. A tzaddik is more than, a Rebbe is more than a Rav. A Rebbe is a Rebbe, a teacher, a mentor who cares for me, who worries about my physical life, my social life, my spiritual life, my parnassah, my livelihood, my shidduchim, everything. It's an all-embracing, almost love relationship. It's almost like a family relationship in which the Chassidim feel they're part of the family of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe feels he's part of the family of the Chassidim. When the Rebbe makes a chasna, it's a simcha for the whole Chassidus. It's like a family simcha for the whole Chassidus. There's this intimate bonds of mutual support, because the Rebbe can only flourish as a Rebbe. Who's the dominant one in the relationship? Well, both ways round, really. The Rebbe cares for the Chassidim, but the Chassidim care for the Rebbe. And the reason this emerges from Chassidus is because, and this is already inherent, this is again one of the discoveries of the last 20, 30 years, or rediscoveries. This is already inherent in the Baal Shem Tov's teachings himself. Again, academics used to argue that this was a second and third generation innovation of Chassidus, that Chassidus went from just being a small circle of mystics around their mystic leader, the Baal Shem Tov, and became this mass sociological movement in which you had the tzaddik and the courts and so on. And that's true historically. That's a historical fact that it only came to its full flowering a couple of generations after the Baal Shem Tov. But the concept of having a tzaddik as a spiritual mentor and pipeline to spirituality, to that connection to the divine, is already alluded to in the Baal Shem Tov's writings himself. And the reason this is necessary is because it is a fact that most people can't easily live in this divine suffused world. Most people can't easily bridge the divide between heaven and earth. Most people aren't near prophets like the Baal Shem Tov, who has these mystical experiences. Most people can't achieve mystical union with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Most people don't know the Kabbalistic secrets to be miyachid yichudim, to unite that which is disparate and disparate and plural. So how do you live? If every Jew is meant to have these mystical experiences, how do you do this when we're average? And the answer to that is the relationship to the Rebbe. The tzaddik can somehow, the profound sociology of living together as a group. And we have records of this to this day, of the Nim. I don't think we realized the degree to which certain corners of Chassidus are still mystical to this day. When the Lubavitch Rebbe used to give one of his very long sichos, there were certain set pieces using a certain tune and a certain experience, which was in a sense a mass mystical experience. And we have records of people who lived through this, where as a group they would hear the Rebbe speaking, and the Rebbe was in an altered state of consciousness, in which the words were emerging from his mouth almost unconsciously. The moshel they use for this is like that described by Moshe Rabbeinu and in Devarim. Shechina medaberes mitoch grono. It's almost as if the divine is speaking from his throat. And there's many public speakers feel a degree of altered state of consciousness when they're speaking. But this is a whole ritual in which the Rebbe is being the pipeline for that divine union and for that mystical experience. So it's a sociological revolution. It's also a revolution that argues if every Jew has to be part of this revelation, because everything is suffused with divine energy, and the humans tasked with seeing the divine energy in the world, or the Jewish people, then every Jew is precious and valuable. Now, we all hopefully subscribe to that, but I mean that as a lived experience. The love that we're meant to experience to Hashem becomes near identical to the love that we're meant to experience towards God, towards the tzaddik, and near identical to the love that we're meant to experience to each other. In Chassidus lies a sort of kibbutz type model, an equality. All us Chassidim are equal because we're all clustered around the Rebbe, who is in a sense greater than us and in a sense less than us because he depends on us to draw close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're all fellow travelers. Now, in the past, you may have thought that you are a closer person to God than you because you're a great Talmid Chacham and you're an Igremus. You keep mitzvahs fully and you only keep mitzvahs partially. But if the route to real spirituality is through your tzaddik, then there's something equalizing about that also. And so what I'm trying to explain over here is that out of a theological idea given a twist by the Baal Shem Tov, I don't mean a twist in negative way, nothing I'm saying is meant in the least negative, I'm only trying to describe, given morphed by the Baal Shem Tov into something a little different, out of that emerges a psychological revolution, and out of that emerges a sociological revolution that changes the nature of the landscape of the Jewish world in a very profound way, and out of which emerges the second round of controversy against Chassidus. One round is against the theological ideas, and the second round is against the sociological ideas because it's creating upheaval in the social fabric of East Europe. So I want to in a moment pause and try and explain what are the theological implications of this worldview, and then we'll move into abstract philosophy before we come back to sort of sociology again. Yeah. Okay. So, and any thoughts or questions around this? Yeah.
So it's also I'm trying to understand this transition from Baal Shem Tov's own group into universalists.
Yes.
In that sort of implies from if you were to see his stage, there would just be one Rebbe.
Yes.
And all Chassidim would identify
with this one Rebbe. Yes.
Because that includes all Jews.
Yes.
In all walks of life. But it seems to morph into like a group which is they then associated with their Rebbe, and there's nonsense there. So they're already saying, well, there's us and there's them. We're not all universalists anymore. We've become particularists quite quickly.
So Hasidus goes through two changes. The first is it becomes a self-conscious movement. We have no evidence that the Baal Shem Tov wanted to create a movement in that sense. This was a Klal Yisrael teaching. And in some ways, as I said, during an analogy from the Sephardi world, where there's different but somewhat parallel things taking place in which Kabbalah is rising. It doesn't become a movement of, there's the Kabbalists and the them and us. We're all part of this. There are some that are better at learning Kabbalah, some that are worse at learning Kabbalah, some that do that, some that don't. Not every idea creates a movement. The Baal Shem Tov is very clear. He wants all Jews to be part of this. It's not a movement. It's a teaching of Torah. None of us are Rashiists or Rambamists. They're part of a collective Jewish conversation, and we all learn Rashi. Rashi belongs to all of us. What makes Chassidus into a self-defined, self-conscious movement to a degree is an internal sense amongst the followers of the Baal Shem Tov that we have something unique, but also perhaps the opposition to Chassidus. Because Chassidus reaches this clash point, at that point it has to begin behaving like a movement, because evidently not everyone is so easily going to belong to it. Yeah. Now within Chassidus itself, a second change occurs, and you have groups following different tzaddikim. Now, there isn't a clear doctrine in Chassidus that you can only have one tzaddik. Chassidus it's not meant to be a sociological Rebbe-based movement in essence. In essence, it's saying all Jews are meant to have these elevated spiritual experiences in which they see the world suffused with the divine. But now there's a problem, not everyone can do this. And therefore, there's a number of leaders that arise that are recognized by their peers as having a unique ability to lift and elevate everyone. And they become different Hasidic groups. The Maggid of Mezeritch, I mentioned the Baal Shem Tov for our purposes, had two Talmidim that are particularly impactful. Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, who's a writer, and the Maggid of Mezeritch, who's a speaker and also an organizer. And he does, from what we can tell, self-consciously send his star students to different parts of he only outlives his Rebbe by 20 years or so, and he sends his star students to different regions and says, set up Chassidus, bring Chassidus to this area, bring Chassidus to this area. So that becomes spheres of influence, and therefore you have courts operating in different areas. And then out of that emerges politics, because later generations you have influence and who's in control. Sometimes poor politics, ego-driven politics. Being a Rebbe is a powerful position. There's control and so on. And sometimes lishma politics. By that I mean the different tzaddikim have slightly different theologies, and they really disagree with what their code tzaddik is saying. And eventually this becomes dynastic, and an idea emerges that you can only be a Rebbe if you're somehow appointed by a previous Rebbe, and therefore you trace a lineage back to the Baal Shem Tov, and it becomes more complicated. But in essence, Chassidus in its first generations is a counter-revolutionary movement. It's a revolutionary movement. I'm sorry, it's a movement that's very unconservative. It's what part of its opposition to the non-Chassidic world is that you have dynastic inheritance of rabbinic positions and the like, and we see there's much that's countercultural in it. The shepherd boy playing his pipe and so on. Sorry, yes.
The fact that church, you can only reach God through and not direct.
So one of the criticisms of the opponents of Chassidus is exactly that you are creating an intermediary in your relationship to God. So you claim you're drawing people closer to God and somehow democratizing this, and all Jews are able to access God. But actually, you've done the opposite, because you've said that you can only access God through a tzaddik. Yeah, and that's one of the criticisms of Chassidus, 100%. You want to tell something? Okay. So let me just try, though, and at least today, speak about the pure theological implications of Chassidus. And here I want to explain, there is much that's unclear about very early Chassidus and the theology of the Baal ShemTov. There's much that's unclear about what's him and what's his students, and how far they went in some of these ideas, and how far these ideas were moderated by the criticism of their opponents, of those who criticize them. So I want to present in the most extreme form where this theology can go, and how what sounds like an innocent theology can become very, very dangerous. And this was pointed out by the opponents of Chassidus. So why does Chassidus get attacked? For lots of reasons. It gets attacked because it's a sociological movement and it creates a social revolution, 100%. It gets attacked because people are suspicious of charisma and the degree of charismatic Jewish leadership. It gets attacked because it's publicizing Kabbalah, and that's controversial. It gets attacked because it's changing minhagim here and there, and that's controversial. It gets attacked because some people confuse it with Sabbatean groups and suspect that this is a neo-Sabbatean group. There's a lot of reasons that it gets attacked. But in its heart, it also gets attacked because of theology. And this is what we're going to focus on. We're not interested in focusing on the aspects that are circumstantial, the sociological revolution, all claims that we know to be untrue, such as that they're closet Sabbateans. They're not. We now know that with absolute certainty. It's not a doubt. I just want to focus on the pure theological debate between Maggid, the Vilna Gaon and the Baal Shem Tov. Let's lay it like that. The pure theological debate. So Hasidus claims a immanence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It claims that the physical world, in some sense, should be seen as an illusion, because not only does God maintain everything, which is classic Jewish theology, but God is everything. Everything, in a sense, is a mere barrier to immersion in godness. In a sense, we should see existence as not yesh me'ayin, something from nothing, but ayin miyesh, nothing from something. The only reality is God, and our reality is but a pale shadow of that, and in a sense is illusory. And the secret of growth is to negate yourself, to see through that illusion, to realize that everything is God. The peak of achievement in Chassidic legends, that they tell the story of no less a figure than the Baal HaTanya, that as he's lying on his deathbed, he's looking up at the beams of the house and he says, I can no longer see them. They've disappeared. They've evaporated. Even physicality ceases to have any existence. God is everywhere. God is everything. We are, in a sense, in God and even of God in particular ways. And our ultimate role is in one Chassid, in a certain Chassidic language, bittul hayesh, the negation of self. Chassidim, I'm just going to take a note for myself because I wanted to get back to this. Chassidim see bittul hayesh, negation of self, bittul, vatel, to negate, like bittul chametz is coming up, hayesh of that which is. And the peak of service of God is a type of mesirat nefesh, a type of sacrifice of self, so that we cease to exist. There is nothing within us left at all, and in that sense, we are simply a manifestation of God. There are terms that are flung around the Jewish world that originate in Chassidus, like chelek elokam mimal. The essence of my soul is a part of God from above. This is a pasuk in Iyov, but being given again a Chassidish twist, in which chelek elokam mimal, part of me is godly. There's even language in which Chassidim, the Baal Shem Tov spoke, used this language, in which he spoke about human beings and Jews as being like a limb of the divine, like a limb of the divine, in such a real sense, part of the divine. There is an analogy, a moshel, that as far as we can tell dates back to the Baal Shem Tov himself, which is really modern in its sense. It describes the best a description I can do of this is like a virtual reality or a hologram, in which it describes a prince desperately longing to go to his father, and there's this complex maze or palace paths that he has to navigate in order to get to the king, to get to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And at some point or other, he realizes they're an illusion. They're just projections. They're just a hologram. They're just a virtual reality. And he realizes he can just walk straight through them and he can get straight to God. And this is his description of life. You know, we live in this life and we make it all so complicated because we see all these illusory things, our ego and our power and our covet and our lust and our desires and our personalities and struggles. We just need to fling them all away and just walk straight through, and we can do that. And then we can just embrace the divine. Now, all of this sounds wonderful and beautiful, but there are elements of this which are quite troubling, and I just want to try and explain what they are. The first aspect is, if you take this to its fullest extent and you really believe everything is an illusion, then we have a problem with Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim es haaretz. The pasuk seems to say that the world was created. Vayihi or, Yikavu hamayim. Is there something called mayim? Is there something called Is there something called chayos, animals? Well, the psukim seem to tell us there is. The pasuk says that God did create the world. So what do we mean when we say it's a mere illusion? More than that, these terminologies have halachic status. Mayim has halachas towards it. If you drink mayim, you say shakol ni'ebedvaru. You can use water to pour over your hands, and it will give you netares adayim. You can dip in water, and it will be a mikvah. What do we mean when we say everything's an illusion? Do we really mean that it has no existence and no significance? Well, surely the pursuit of human achievement is because things do have at least some significance, maybe less significant than God, certainly less significant than God, but no significance. Isn't the significance they have the only way that we have to reach God? Isn't that the only vehicle we have to reach God? And is the Jewish aim really to cease to exist? If that isn't, what's the point of our existence? We're born, we're deluded in thinking there's a yesh, there's a me here. And my ultimate goal, this sounds almost like some of the Far Eastern faiths, nirvana and negation of self in a complete way. And our claim against that is, then what's the point of it all? It's just this hamster wheel of misery in which we exist, we're deluded in thinking we exist, and the peak of success is to cease to exist. Is there nothing of me meant to be left by the end? Then what am I for, and what am I? Why was I ever created? If my creation was there, as classic Jewish theology says, in order to give me reward, to give me existence, then I understand. But if my ultimate achievement is non-existence, then just make me non-existence. Let there not be a me at all. So where is this all going? What does this mean? Then philosophically, what does this mean? Who is it who's being deluded to? Who's experiencing the illusion? If everything is an illusion, there's one thing we can say for sure, which is my sense of self can't be an illusion, because there has to be something there that is experiencing this illusion. So Chassidus seems to be pushing in its extreme in a direction that's very problematic. More than that, the opponents of Chassidus accused it, and there's some tantalizing hints in Chassidus that there were thinkers who went in that direction, accused it of negating basic tenets of faith. For example, the doctrine of Aveira Lishma. Because if everything is an illusion, then what is good and what is evil? What does it mean to have good and evil? What does it mean to have that which is prohibited and that which is allowed if everything is an illusion? And don't forget, this is 60 years after Shabtai Tzvi, who taught a bracha of Mateh Isurim, and everything is mutter because there's such revelation of God. So this is drifting towards antinomianism, to negation of the law itself. If you look in some of the sources, one of the claims made against Chassidim is that they are demoting rationality. And you see this in some streams of Chassidus to this day, dancing for hours on end with blaring music and a crazy lifestyle, and some dabbling with drugs and other things in certain extreme branches of Breslov and the like. And there's claims against early Chassidus that they're deliberately engaging in irrational behavior. They're dancing, they're spinning cartwheels in shul and the like, because you can see how this leads to an ideology of even break down reason, because reason is like a barrier to the illusion. Reason is one of the tools and crutches of this illusion that we live. Then there are accusations in Chassidim that they're pursuing an Aveira Lishma, that they're saying even Isser V'Heter doesn't apply. There are accusations against Chassidim that they believe you can daven and learn in the toilet. Now, this sounds like a very trivial claim. It's not trivial, it's halacha, but why would you make that? The point they're trying to bring out is there's no areas that are pure and impure. Now, of course, we recognize that in some respect or other, a toilet is no less pure or more pure, less holy or more holy than anywhere else. But because for we human beings we see it as a place of uncleanliness, that has halachic significance because we humans matter. We count. How we see the world does have significance. And Chassidus the claim against Chassidus is that it's demoting all all these significances. If to be a human is to be deluded and the only secret is to realize that everything is illusion, then what does it mean to be a human? If in truth the world is ayin miyesh, if in truth nothing from something, if in truth the ultimate avodah is bittul hayesh, is negation of self, if in truth the job of a human is to convert ani, my sense of I, to ayin, rearrangements of the letters, aleph yud nun, to ein, to nothingness. If that's the role of a human, then what's the point of existence? What's it mean to negate ourselves into nothingness? Now, we believe in humbleness. We believe in self-negation. We treat Moshe as a hero because he is the most modest of all people. But there's still an ani there. There's an I there. There's a person there. If he ceases to exist, then what is he? And there are trace elements of this. And many years ago, I don't remember if it was in the days when I was still recording or not, we spoke about Bechira and determinism. And I mentioned that there are only two thinkers to the best of my knowledge. Again, there may have been many hundreds of thousands of Jews who went down this path, but two authors who are great figures, who are recognized as significant Jewish thinkers, who published their works in the history of Judaism, who resolved Bechira and Yediyah, the conflict between God's all-encompassing knowledge of the world and our sense of self and free will, who resolved that dilemma by negating Bechira and moving to determinism. And one of them is a great Hasidic leader who seems to write this explicitly, that in truth we live in a deterministic universe because God is everything and ayin. There is nothing of a human being really over here in this. I mentioned when I don't remember, I think we did Breslov once as a series or considered Breslov, but within Breslov there's a very strong trend of thought. I'm not talking about the modern day extreme faction Breslov, within the great Rav Nachman Breslov himself, in which he says the greatest peak of human achievement is to recognize our own irrationality, our own reason. We spoke about it when we spoke about his anti-philosophy. I didn't elaborate on this point. I spoke about Rav Nachman as sort of the great anti-philosophy philosopher, in which he's very skeptical about reason. But the truth is, in many ways, he's going further than that. And he's the Nachman Breslov, the grandson, by the way, of the Baal ShemTov, the great grandson of the Baal ShemTov, is pressing an ideology in which he's skeptical about all reason and the ability of humans to know anything at all. I'll just share one Breslov, Nachman Breslov story. In which he tells a parable. He teaches through stories because he wants to go back to Mezeritch, right? Again, if you remember our discussions around philosophy and Mezeritch, different ways of knowing truth, he wants to teach not through philosophy, so stories are a vehicle to do this, and tells the story of a king who has a dream that the crop, the wheat harvest has been poisoned, and everyone who eats the wheat is going to go crazy, is going to lose their minds. By the way, there's a biological phenomenon to this. There's a fungus that grows in wheat, and this was well known in the Ukraine, in the region where Nachman is operating, in which sadly this can happen. So he has a dream that the whole wheat crop of the world, unfortunately, so he discusses with his closest advisor, what do we do? And his closest advisor says, well, we need to tell everyone. And then they realize that's not going to work because it's going to create mass havoc and chaos, and there's going to be a mass riot. And what sort of solution is that when that's all, no one can starve, and the only wheat to have is going to just take away everyone's ability to reason? So say, okay, we're going to do something else. We will put for ourselves aside a small quantity of wheat, so at least we'll stay reasonable. But then you realize, what sort of life is this to be a sane person in a world gone insane? What a miserable life. So they decide, you know what, we're also going to drink of the wheat, or eat of the wheat, and we're also going to go insane, but we will have a mark on our forehead, and when we look at each other, we'll at least remember that we've lost our reason, that we're insane. End of story. Now, like a lot of Nachman's stories, very, very troubling, very thought-provoking. But he's telling us something, and his stories are amazing. They're wonderful. I'm scared. I'm nervous. We're talking about great spiritual leaders, but he's telling us something. He's telling us the peak of success in this crazy world of ours is you can't tell everyone that we're insane. It's not going to be heard. You can't be sane in an insane world. The peak of human success is at least know that you've lost, that you have no reason. At least know that you're insane. That's the wisest a human can hope to achieve. Now, I shared this parable before, but I shared it as an anti-philosophy, but that's how far he's going. And the opponents of Chassidus are seeing the danger in these ideas. Now, I want to use a terminology, a philosophical term that's often thrown at Chassidus. Again, I'm not saying that Chassidus went this far. It's very difficult to know whether they went all this way. All I'm saying is that the opponents of Chassidus certainly thought they went this far. The opponents of Chassidus, and there are tantalizing hints in Chassidus that they were drifting towards this. And possibly some thinkers went this far, or possibly no one did, and this is an unfair libel labeled accused Chassidus. We don't know, but they're definitely in a world in which there's a balance between immanence and transcendence, the presence of God and the degree to which we are removed from God. In a world in which there's a philosophical problem, in which we subscribe to belief in an infinite absolute God whose absolute existence and has merely shared of his existence with us, there is a profound problem. So in what way do we exist? And where is there space for us to exist in the presence of an infinite God? How do we exist in the presence of an infinite God? These are philosophical problems that trouble all great thinkers through Kabbalah and its doctrine of tzimtzum and somehow a sort of constriction of the divine presence and the like. So there are real issues here that need to be dealt with. Chassidus definitely pushes towards the immanence model, pushes towards the less existence of physical reality and the move to it being more illusory. If there's a number of stopping stations along the way, it's hard to know how far it went, but it certainly edges towards one end. And if it went all the way, then the implications are very disturbing. Because again, if humans and existence, physical existence is an illusion, and the most we can hope to achieve is to be bittul hayesh, to cease to exist, what's the point of human existence? Doesn't this contradict the first chapter of the Torah in which it says God did create the world? Doesn't this contradict the whole halachic system, which does ascribe importance and significance to physical beings? Doesn't this contradict the doctrine ultimately of Bechira? Isn't this antinomianism and a rejection of the halachic norm as a whole? The implications are, and philosophically, who is being eluded, who is experiencing this illusion? So there's a number of problems with the system if you go all the way. Now, philosophically, this ideology can be labeled a version of pantheism, a version of belief that, in a sense, everything is God, and God is in everything. And you have Hasidic masters that say that. They say, in this cup is God as much as he is anywhere else. We teach our children an innocent song, popularized by Uncle Moshe, who is a Chassid of Chabad, reflecting a piece of ideology of Chabad Chassidus. Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is absolutely everywhere, up, down, right, left, and all around. Very non-controversial. We all believe that, right? No, we don't believe that. We believe that God is everywhere in the sense that he is up above time and space. We don't believe that he is everywhere in the sense that he is in space in a spatial sense. If I say God is here and God is there and God is up and God is down and God is right and God is left, then we are in breach of the union of God, because that means there's pieces of God. God is here and God is here and God is there and God is there. Well, God is here and here and here, but I thought we said God is unified. So that there's, again, depends how you spin out this ideology. It can go in very, very problematic directions. What do I mean when I understand the idea behind the song, but is the song correctly describing that formula? We say God is above time and space as borrowed language, the famous Rambam's negative path, because we can't say in a positive way. We can't say God is everywhere in the sense that he's here and here and here and here, because then he's spatial. What do these ideas mean? In fact, this innocent terminology of a human being having chelek elokam mimal, what do we mean by that? A piece of God from above? God can be cut into pieces? A Jew is a limb of God? God has parts and limbs? Now the answer to these questions, Hasidic answer to the questions, these are metaphorical language. But a Judaism that's run away from using this, that's emphasized anthropomorphisms and has become very cautious about them. What do we mean by inventing new anthropomorphic language? And what exactly does it mean, chelek elokam mimal? If you mean, what is the mashal? Anthropomorphism means it's an analogy. Analogy of what? I understand when I say God's arm in the Torah, I mean God's power, his ability to do anything. The eyes of God, his awareness. But what do I mean when I say I'm chelek elokam mimal? I mean I am God? Or I'm a piece of God? Which one do I mean? What analogy am I using? Let's unpick that idea. In what way am I a chelek elokam mimal? I can become God-like. God has shared of his existence with me. Maybe panentheism is a legitimate Jewish view, that we are within God somehow. Our existence is maintained by God. God has shared of his existence with us. But what do we mean when we say we are a piece of God? Now again, this is a posuk in Iyov, but look at the classic commentaries, it's understood classically. So the opponents of Chassidus didn't understand what was going on. They looked at this and said, if you mean what you're saying, this is dangerous, this is chaotic, this is negating human reason, this is negating the halachic system, this is pantheism. I want you to understand what is it that led the opponents of Chassidus to take a movement which we look at now and say, we like Chassidus, we don't like Chassidus. Some of us in this room are probably somewhat more empathetic to it, some are less, some like it, some don't. But what would take a movement that ultimately is an innocent movement from Jews trying to serve Hashem and needs its opponents to throw at them the words, the vitriol that was used of this is kafira, this is minus, this is sabbatian, this is chaos, because in this ideology, when taken too far, it is something very, very disturbing and troubling. Now, again, did the earliest generations, were there any great thinkers that did take it this far? We don't know exactly. Are there traces of the doctrine of Averi Lishma in some classic Hasidic texts? Yes, 100%. We can talk about Averi Lishma, about sinning with sincerity and what that means on another occasion. But there are some elements of that. Now, did they mean it in a very nuanced way with lots of boundaries and lots of caution? Yes. Is this a theology that maybe the great thinkers understood was nuanced? Yes. But when you're creating a mass movement of this, very dangerous. You can understand why the publicizing of Kabbalah is a dangerous idea. If Kabbalah is dealing with these ideas about the relationship of God, the infinite with the finite universe, you can understand that this is only an idea for a very subtle trained thinker and isn't for someone who hasn't been trained in these subtle ideas. So the popularization of Kabbalah is dangerous in this thought. What I'm trying to do over here, I'll come to a moment, what I'm trying to do over here is explain a movement that's very, very complicated, that has numerous facets to it, and numerous criticism voiced against it, and try and explain why there is a common denominator between all of these. The theological idea that emerges from Kabbalah of certain elite mystics in some way being able to unify creation and in some way unify themselves with the divine becomes a mass movement under the inspiration of the Baal ShemTov and his followers, becomes a movement that is meant to be somehow accessible to everyone. Out of that, it becomes psychologized. It's meant to integrate with the psyche of every person, and sociological, because it's every person, it's a mass movement. And the ideology being presented is a very, very subtle one. It's dealing with very complicated ideas, and ideas that, if taken on face value and to the full extent, or if misunderstood, if it's a misunderstanding, can undermine what we'd call really Ikrei Hadat, the principles of faith and the very foundation of the spiritual system of Judaism. You can argue that the Baal Shem Tov, the followers say, we're taking mysticism away from someone who withdraws from this world and goes into a cave, and it makes it mass for everyone. But the alternative idea is you've put everyone in that cave. Everyone is living in a world in which they just see everything as an illusion. Now, I want to just unpick this cave analogy for one more second, just to tie the dot. There are aspects of this which, in a sense, are very Neoplatonist, just to put Hasidus into part of the family of philosophy. Remember Plato, who says that this table that we're seeing is just a pale shadow of the real table, which is the Platonic form, the abstract plane. Do you remember Plato's analogy in the cave? The kids sitting in the cave, and all they can ever see is they're chained to a cave. They can only ever see the back of the cave, which is like a projector film screen. Behind them is a fire. Behind that is real world. All they can ever see is shadows moving on the cave wall, but they can speculate there's something more real behind that. And the idea of Plato, which is translated into Jewish terms by figures like the Rambam, that only Malachim live in the world of abstract ideas and Platonic forms. We humans can only ever see the pale shadow of these Platonic forms. This table is less real than the real table. Why? When I say this is a table is the abstract idea table, right? The concept table. The concept table is above time and space in some ways. The concept table can never be destroyed. This physical table, I can blow up, I can cease to exist. This physical table only exists here. The concept table is above time and space. And this physical table is made of plastic with 4 legs. Concept table has how many legs? As many legs as we want the table to have, made of any material. So that somehow concepts or Platonic forms are more real than physical objects. These ideas come from Plato and from Neoplatonism, and there is something Neoplatonic about this, of arguing that everything we're seeing is just the shadow of a deeper reality. That's what mysticism is, in a sense. And we're here we're seeing a meeting between mysticism and philosophy, because mysticism is that sense that somehow I can internalize its experience and live in a world in which I see concepts as real and the physical world as somehow less real. And the Baal Shem Tov is saying, I'm going to give you exercises. I want every Jew, in a sense, to become that mystic who sees the whole world as somewhat of an illusion. Now, the problem is the devil in the detail. What do we mean when we say the physical world is a pale shadow of the spiritual world? If we really mean it's an illusion, then we've negated creation. If we really mean that this is ayin miyesh, if we really mean nothing from something, if we really mean that the purpose of creation is bitul hayesh, is complete negation of any sense of selfhood, if we mean that the real avodah is to make of the ani, the I, into ayin, into nothingness, then out of this emerges what seems to be very counter-Jewish philosophy. If we really mean chelek al mimal, so this is the questions that arose over this. So we've been on a journey, ladies and gentlemen, from a remarkable vision of a divine suffused world, a world glowing with light, to taken to its fullest extreme, a very difficult philosophy. And this is the debate between the Chassidim and Maggid. I'd like next time we learn to speak about the positives. What does it mean to live in this world glowing with life? What exercises is the Baal ShemTov giving us to do that? What does it mean to be a early Chassid or a real Chassid? Someone who's living with this light, this world of joy and light and equality that the Baal ShemTov is pushing forward. But I want you to understand that behind that lies a philosophy that the opponents of Chassidus certainly see as very dangerous. Sorry, we're waiting patiently.
Within that, not sure that
Yeah.
to what extent is that, can that be, or is it a point of friction between Chassidim?
Okay, so the question for those online is how does this tie in with the difference between Jew and Gentile? And the answer is that those tasked with the responsibility of bringing out the divine infused world are Jews, and this is part of this fraternity of Jews, and the idea that everyone needs to love other Jews. And the role of the Gentile is different in that respect. Now, I don't want to rush what's a complicated subject, particularly a very sensitive topic, other than to say that Chassidus, non-Chassidus, Kabbalah, non-Kabbalah, philosophy, non-philosophy. Everyone agrees with the pasuk that says that Adam is created in the image of God. Everyone agrees that all humans are created in the image of God. Everyone agrees with the mission of us that says Chaviv Adam Shenifra B'Tzelem. Beloved are all humans who are created in the image of God. Chiba Yisroel, the Jewish people, have an additional love that Nodas them, that we know that we're created in the image of God. Everyone agrees with the Mishnah that says, why was Adam created alone? Why do all humans emerge from one couple? So that no one can turn to another person and say, my ancestor is greater than your ancestor. So everyone agrees with these profoundly spiritual truths about all humans. However, the nature of the spiritual role and the uniqueness of the spiritual role is a controversy between the Kabbalists and the philosophers. To what degree this is ontological, or existential, or intrinsic, and to what degree this is just functional, and the like. And again, I can give a series on Jew and Gentile in different Jewish thinkers and how they understand the difference. I don't want to rush what's a very sensitive topic and can be misunderstood like that. But all I will say is that those tasked with a mission and the responsibility and obligation of doing that, and therefore the uniqueness of this spiritual closeness are in Hasidic thinking God, or Hasidic thinking Jews, and in later generations, there are those that flag that there are aspects, for example, of Chabad ideology that they see as racist as a result of this ideology. I think there are good answers to that. I don't think it's racist, but it can lend itself towards that line of thought. But we discussed this already under Rabbi Huda Levi's thought in the Kuzari. Right? I think we discussed it when we spoke about the Kuzari already. So it's somewhat more of a Kabbalistic philosophical divide than a Hasidic, non-Hasidic divide, though there are opponents of Hasidus that accuse Hasidim of taking it much further than is inherent in Kabbalah. But it's its own topic and own genre. Yes.
So the concept in the Shema,
Yes.
or then very intrinsic in Kabbalah, explicit about
Yes.
being this physical to the spiritual. That was
Yes.
to disappear as well, isn't it? It's all spiritual.
Well, the idea that the physical can be elevated to be spiritual, can be used to be spiritual, that we humans have within us an animalistic side and a spiritual side, and need to choose which sort. These are the norms of philosophy. If you take this pantheistic idea to the fullest extent, again, I'm not, God forbid, saying Hasidim are pantheists. I'm saying they're drifting much more towards the immanence of God, taken to the fullest extreme, which its opponents accuse it of doing. It negates physicality completely. You're not elevating physical, you're negating the physical. Elevating physical, I get the point of. God created the physical world, and our role is to elevate it, and in so doing, become, in a sense, partners with God. And that's what gives us some degree of real purpose and meaning in existence. If the purpose of existence is to see through the illusion, then you can argue it's some sort of nasty trick. We're just, for some reason or other, put in a world full of illusion. We have to see through the illusion, and in so doing, we cease to exist. So what's the point of this period of time in which we ever existed? Well, the answer has to be, at least the way Chassidus nowadays is presented, these questions that I've given are knockout blows. I don't think anyone can answer them. Now, modern day Chassidus, later generation Chassidus, are very clear they didn't mean it that far. The debate is, A, were there any that did mean it that far? B, and this is a response to the criticism of Chassidus. There are later Chassidic thinkers that will say the following: as much as we were hurt by the Vilna Gaon's attacks, we needed it in order to keep us on the straight and narrow. So The probable answer is that no. We have to say this because I believe that the early Hasidic thinkers were great Jews. I mean, I'm not even questioning that. So we have to say that they didn't mean it this far. They meant something edging close towards that. And the problem with edging close towards that is that you are liable to be misunderstood. And that's a fair criticism of a movement. If you're saying things that are so subtle and you try to make this a mass movement, then you're going to go wrong. We do know there are individuals who meant it as far as I've said. So the most I can say is that given that we as someone who is a non-Chassid and in a sense from the base Mezeritch that isn't Chassidus, we still recognize the great Chassidus as being great individuals and great people. We have to therefore say that none of the great leaders meant it that way. But if you take it to the fullest extreme, then it seems to negate existence. Paradoxically, by the way, I'll just say another piece of philosophy. It creates a greater disunity of God, not greater unity of God. And let me just explain why. There is a problem, which is, if God is perfect unity, how come I see disunity, plurality, multiplicity in the world? Well, the answer is, you could say, okay, it's our role to unify it all. That's in a sense what we're meant to do. But then we have a problem, okay, but even the Havamina, even the pre-thought, even my initial look at the world in which we see disunity surely is a contradiction to unity of God. The fact that I, as a conscious mind, can see disunity itself is a type of disunity. And the answer is no, because that's pre-thought of disunity, that Hava Amina, that first conception of disunity, is the route through which I can bring unity into the world. And therefore, ultimately, it's sublimated, it's elevated, it serves the purpose of bringing unity into existence. If, however, when I achieve unity, I see my previous thought as an illusion, as disappearing, we now have to ask ourselves, so what purpose did that stage of illusion serve? And the answer is, if it served no purpose, because the most I can do with it is make it disappear, then it's a rupture in God's unity, because it never became part of the unified picture. Classic Jewish theology says that one day we will look back on all our experiences and see them as ultimately revealing God in the world. Revealing God in the world. Now we can say, okay, that's ultimately, but what about in the meantime? And the answer is, because you can only get to the ultimately through the meantime, therefore that's also part of the unity. But if the ultimately it means that we will look back on the illusion and say it was all an illusion, it was non-reality, then that illusion never can be integrated back into unity, because it was a mistake. It was a genuine mistake. So what sounded very God-affirming actually ends up removing God in a sense from the picture, because if it's a complete illusion, but I am a human who did have that illusion, that sense, that consciousness that I had of disunity, of non-awareness of God, in what way does that ever become aligned with God? If you go with a non-pantheistic theology, which I'm going to say is agreed upon by Chassidim and non-Chassidim, because I've never went that far, then my lack of awareness of God ultimately becomes the vehicle through which I can integrate God into my life and is part of the unity. If that lack of awareness of God was only ever an illusion, it was only ever a trick, then what was the point of it? And in that sense, therefore, in what way can it ever be reintegrated back into God's unity? So ironically, in this picture, there's a purposelessness that develops from it. If the peak of human success, if let's go with again, I'm no expert on other theologies and Buddhism and so on, but at least the way Buddhism is quoted as saying the peak of success is we're in this cycle of life, and eventually non-existence is the peak. And what's the point of existence? Existence is this painful experience that we go through, and that the peak is non-existence. So I don't know a way of resolving any of these questions. Maybe I'm just speaking as a non-Chassid, but to the best of my knowledge, I don't know of any Chassidim that claim this doctrine anymore, and we have to believe that there never was such a claim. It was simply a misunderstanding of an overly subtle theology. But there are glimpses of figures that did edge towards this, I'm afraid. Yeah.
I think with it, here in the sense that what point to do there and try to improving the world and to bring justice to and the other godly to the world around you, if in fact they are all parts of the whole divine spirit.
So this is the question again. If in the non-Chassidic understanding, I'm saying even in Chassidism, I'm saying in the conventional understanding, that we live in a world which has evil, and our job is to partner with God in destroying that evil. Be'ata Mikabach, the Apostle says. There is something called Ra, and our job is to destroy it, and that's what gives meaning to human existence. If it's not an illusion, where does it go? I'll tell you a story. This is a 100% true story. Many years ago, when I was involved in a certain school, we invited a guest speaker who claims to be a member of Chabad and presents themselves as a Chabad expert. I believe no expert. And he was presenting a very raw, in my view, superficial, inaccurate, but certainly extreme version of this ideology, in which he was saying things which I feel was pantheism. And he's explaining the idea that all evil is an illusion. And then he makes the following declaration. He says good is bad and bad is good. And then he says to the kids, chant along with me, good is bad and bad is good. And it was a surreal and unreal moment in my life in which someone is doing that. Now we had a head teacher at the time who was present, and he stepped in and stopped the kid saying this. And this was a non-Jewish head teacher, and he said to me afterwards, I came in, I was called in, I wasn't there present at the seminar, I was called in after the incident. He felt very awkward. It's not his role as a non-Jewish head teacher to step into a rabbi speaking. And he said to me, there can't be any theology that says this. This can't be an authentic expression of Judaism. So there's at least one figure out there who takes that theology this far and understands this is what it means. Now, I don't know how they would answer this question. There are, I have to tell you, online YouTube teachers of Torah who claim to be representing Chassidus and Chabad and the like, who are saying things very, very far along the line of what I've described, and say theologies that I think are certainly the theologies that the Vilna Gaon was attacking, and to the best of my knowledge, theology that the Baal Chassidus certainly moved away from. I want to be cautious here because we're running out of time. I'm Chas v'Shalom in no way attacking modern day Chassidus. This is a wonderful part of the from world. Again, different people have different ways of serving Hashem. I'm not arguing that we should all become Chassidim, but it represents and it's produced mainstream figures that by any branch of a stream of Orthodoxy have been recognized as Gedolim, and I'm not in any way trying to revive a machlokas that has died down, hundreds of years ago, thank God, and that racked the Jewish world. I'm simply trying to help us understand why what can start off as a beautiful theology can, if taken too far, can be very dangerous, and whether anyone significant ever took that theology too far, I don't know. We have to assume not, if they're significant, if they're part of the Jewish canon. But is it a theology that can lend itself to misunderstanding? Yes. And are there people to this day, hopefully a tiny fraction of people who do misunderstand in this way? Yes, that's a fact that I've met some of them myself personally, and it's a problem. Now, what did this person really mean by their statement? I don't know. I hope they also understood things properly and didn't mean it this far. But even to talk that way is clearly stepping over a line. So we'll finish off now This is the last session, I'm afraid, before Pesach. Emir Hashem, after Pesach, we'll have forgotten all these challenging ideas, and we'll look at the beauty of Chassidish insight and view. Yeah.
These movements, I think about the Rambam in his times, that he was answering, what was going on in Arab philosophy.
Yes.
And he developed his all ideas or whatever, which we at the time also came.
I have to dash to my garages. You have 10 seconds to finish your question.
So I'm just thinking about this is much more. You can argue that it was a sociological movement much more that was responding to what was going on.
Okay, so my first show on Chassidus, I contextualized Chassidus in terms of other stuff going on. I think in history, we always walk a narrow path between recognizing that events occur because of the correct sociological conditions, but they also carry, you don't have a figure like the Baal ShemTov who excites a cadre of followers who are so remarkable unless there's something there. You don't have a figure that succeeds. There's something unique and theologically profound and beautiful and troubling in his philosophy, which yes, fell upon an audience because of sociological conditions, but it's not just a sociological movement. It's a profoundly mystical music with a profound philosophy to it, whether you like it or don't like the philosophy, which spreads probably through a lot of factors, including people being moved by it, answering a deep spiritual needs, and sociology and the like. And there's a mix of reasons why ideas are successful. Yeah. I'm going to stop there just because it's too complicated to answer.